Okay, good morning, everyone. So I just want to share with you, Raz gave me this morning the following update. It is from June 2007. So we should try to get a more recent update. Let's see, it says keeping kosher in France. It's from kosher.online.fr, which I guess is keeping kosher in France. There is a list in French of kosher products without hashgacha made by the Beit Din of Paris. Okay, you can get it online. Fine, good. Okay, let's see. According to this list, baguette from a bakery, but not from industrial manufacturer sold in some supermarkets, is usually permissible. Usually. Raz, what are you giving me? Usually permissible? What does that mean? Usually permissible. Okay?
Kenny and Sarah,
right?
Every morning Sarah went to the baker and got baguette.
You know where I saw that? Outside that French bakery.
So it says, right, check that it is non moulé, which means not baked in the same plate as other cakes. However, croissants and the like are not kosher, so you have to go to kosher bakeries. Yeah. Okay. So basically, as of 2007, some baguettes were kosher. So that's a good start. Okay. All right. This morning, I want to turn our attention to another of the gezeros. Namely the gezerah. Everybody, if you could just mute yourselves, that would be great. Another of the gezeros, namely the gezerah of chalav akum. We spoke about pas akum, which is the bread of a non-Jew. Now we're going to turn our attention to chalav akum, which is the milk that came from let me put it this way, milk that was milked by a non-Jew. It doesn't mean milk that came from a non-Jewish animal. No such thing, right? Milk that was milked from by a non-Jew. Now, excuse me. Obviously, there's a difference in the reason of the gezerah of pas akum and the gezerah of chalav akum. What's the difference? Pas akum. Jerry, go ahead. Why? Oh, good. Pas akum, the gezerah was instituted because of interaction, social interaction. You would be fraternizing with the non-Jews. As opposed to chalav akum, what was the reason for the gezerah of chalav akum? Because the milk might come from a non-kosher animal. Right, from an animal which is known as tameh. Right, when we classify animals, they fall into one of two classifications: either the classification of an animal which is tahor, or the classification of an animal which is tameh. We are obviously only.
What's tahor?
What's tahor? What's an animal that's tahor? An animal that chews its cud and has a split hoof. Right, those are the two simanim of an animal which is tahor. Now, we use interchangeably the terminology of tahor and kosher. We say that an animal is kosher, but that's not precise, right? Because an animal can be tahor and still not kosher. What does that mean? In other words, let's say an animal was tahor. For instance, a cow. A cow is a tahor animal. It chews its cud and it has a split hoof. But let's say that the animal dies of a disease, right? And wasn't shechted. So that animal is not kosher. Even though it's a tahor animal, you can't eat it. It's not kosher. So to use the term kosher when it comes to animals is not so precise. So what we're talking about here is the classification of animals into tahor animals or tameh animals. Tahor animals are distinguished by having a split hoof and by chewing their cud, as opposed to tameh animals, some of which have a split hoof, some of which chew their cud, but none of which have both a split hoof and chew their cud. That's the classification. And we have a principle that says, hayotze min hatame is tame. That if something comes from a tame animal, it is tame. So milk that comes from a tame animal is tame. We're not allowed to consume that milk. Give me an example of milk which comes from a tame animal. Camel's milk, pig's milk, horse's milk. These milks are all in the category of hayotze min hatame tame. So what's the halacha? So the gizeh, right? The halacha is that we're not allowed to drink milk that we know comes from a tamei animal. That's not a gezerah, that's a halacha. Excuse me. That's a halacha which comes from the Torah. Hayotze min hatame is tamei. Yes, Rab.
But bees.
Oh, so Rab is asking you a very good and interesting question. Right, a very good and interesting question that I actually addressed in a ponderable not so long ago. Right, what is honey? Right, in other words, if we have a principle that says hayotze min hatame tame, that milk, something that comes from a tame animal, is considered tame. Therefore, a camel is a tame animal. Milk that comes from a camel is tameh. We're not allowed to consume it. So Rab is asking the question, what about honey? Honey comes from bees. Bees are insects. By definition, we're not allowed to consume most insects. There are some insects that we are allowed to consume, right? Certain locusts that we are allowed to consume. The problem with consuming locusts, I mean, I don't know how many of you have ever had locusts, right? They get stuck between your teeth. The problem with consuming locusts is that we do not have a Mesorah. We don't have a tradition as to which locusts are considered the edible, the tahor kinds of locusts. But there are communities that do have such traditions, among them the Yemenite communities in Israel. And in fact, during times of infestation of locusts in Israel, you'll find recipes printed in the media for cooking these locusts, for making different dishes from locusts. They have a crunch to them, I don't know, but making different dishes from locusts. But obviously it's not something that the majority of Jews consume because we don't have that Mesorah.
Is in the Torah any place that says you're allowed to eat locusts? Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, for sure. It tells what kind of locust is edible.
I have no idea what it means.
But that's the question. The question is the Mesorah. It's similar to consuming certain types of fowl. So, for instance, the question is peacock kosher? Is peacock a bird that is allowed to be consumed? Right? Yes, a peacock is a bird. It's a kind of fowl. Is it allowed to be consumed? So there's a question of Mesorah, because that's how we know which birds are allowed to be consumed. The Torah gives us a list, but we don't know what all of those words mean still in our day. So we have to rely on a Mesorah, that there's a Mesorah tradition that certain fowl was always considered acceptable. That Mesorah says these fowl fit into that category. There was a famous question about turkey, right? About whether or not turkey is considered a tahor kind of bird. Because why? Because there was no Mesorah for turkey. Why was there no Mesorah for turkey? Because there was no turkey in the Middle East. There might have been turkeys in the political arena in the Middle East, but there were no turkey fowls in the Middle East. It was a bird that is indigenous, or that was indigenous, to North America. And therefore, when the Jews came, the question was, can we have turkey? Are we allowed to eat this turkey? And you find responsa literature written about turkey as to whether or not it is considered a tahor animal. By and large, pretty much across the board, today we accept turkey as a tahor animal. Raz?
Ostrich?
A chicken listed as kosher in the Torah?
There's no word for chicken per se, but we have a Masorah that a chicken, is an acceptable type of fowl. It is a tahor fowl, right? Ostrich? No, ostrich is clearly not. Ostrich is tameh, we know that. Right? Ostrich is a tameh kind of fowl. Right? What?
What about pizza?
So peacocks, there's no Masorah. So I, from my friends who are shochtim, right? There is a Masorah in certain communities, in I believe in Morocco, about that peacocks. There's a Masorah that peacocks are a tahor animal, but it's not a widespread kind of Masorah. So it's just an interesting element here.
Masorah from Moshe Rabbeinu, or from a certain time period of rabbis, or when did that originate? That kind
No, so Masorah, the concept of Masorah is something that was passed down from generation to generation. So at the time of the giving of the Torah, where these animals are described by name, obviously everyone in those days knew what the animal was. But in subsequent generations, the names lost meaning, and we needed to rely on the Masorah that this is an acceptable kind of fowl. Okay.
There is no signs for the birds.
So there are no signs for the bird like there are signs for fish, or signs for animals, for mammals.
So get back to honey.
Okay, so thank you for bringing us back. Right, so back to honey. So Rob asked the question about honey. Bees are insects. We know that bees are not kosher. You're not allowed to eat bees, right? Bees are not kosher. How, therefore, can we eat honey? Right? What's the reason for eating honey?
Because it's only gathering the honey from the flowers. It's not going into the.
Okay, so Iraj says, interestingly, there are people who suggest this, that the reason we're allowed to eat honey is because the land of Israel is referred to as Eretz Zavat Chalav Udavash. It's a land flowing with milk and honey, except for one problem. That's not talking about bee honey. That's not bee honey. Thank you, Rabbi Eckstein. It's not bee honey. It is date palm honey, right? It's not bee honey, right? It's honey that comes from the date palm tree, right? It's not bee honey. So bee honey doesn't fit into that category. So how can we have honey? How are we allowed to have bee honey?
There's some pasuk somewhere that had the basis somewhere. I don't remember.
Right, so no pasuk that allows us to have bee honey, but what allows us to have bee honey is the actual mechanism through which honey is produced, right? Honey is not a byproduct. It's not something which comes from the goof, the body of the bee. What happens to honey? So when a bee visits a flower, the bee draws nectar from the flower, right? The nectar from that flower, it goes into a special sac inside the bee, goes into a special sac inside the bee, and is stored in that sac inside the bee and isn't processed at all. It's just stored inside that sac within the bee. It could be that there are proteins in that sac that thicken the nectar. And then when the bee gets back to the hive, what does the bee do? The bee regurgitates from that sac that nectar, that thickened nectar, which now solidifies into honey in the comb. So it's not like the bee has, it's not a product that grew within the bee, right? So for instance, milk from a camel, milk is a product that developed within the camel itself. Honey is not a product that develops within the bee.
They knew this too, 1,800 years ago?
Obviously. Right, obviously. Raz.
I think vegans do not use honey from bees.
Vegans do not use honey from bees?
Why?
I don't
They
know.
can.
I'm not sure why.
According to this,
Okay.
they should.
Okay.
They don't need any animal products.
Okay. I mean, it's an interesting question. I don't know. An interesting question as to whether or not they're considered animal products. I trust you. The vegans don't eat honey from bees. The one thing. So that technically would mean that unadulterated honey would not need hashgacha, right? Unadulterated honey would not need hashgacha. How did they get honey from the comb? Do you know? It's produced, the combs are put into these machines that through centrifugal force, right, drive the honey, right, out of the comb. The Gemara talks about, the Mishnah actually talks about crushing the comb to get the honey out of the comb. The comb would be crushed and the honey would drip out of the comb. Okay, somebody's not muted. Okay, good. So let's go. So back to our case here. So that you're not allowed to drink milk that comes from a tamei animal because of the principle of hayotze min hatamei tamei. Okay? The gezerah is you're not allowed to drink milk that came from an animal milked by a non-Jew. In other words, if a non-Jew presents you with milk, the Chachamim said you're not allowed to drink that milk. Why are you not allowed to drink that milk? This is the gezerah of chalav akum. Why are you not allowed to drink that milk? You're not allowed to drink that milk because perhaps there is milk from a non-kosher, perhaps the milk that he's giving you is milk from a non-kosher animal, or perhaps in the mixture that he's giving you, excuse me, there is milk from a non-kosher animal. So as a result of that, you're not allowed to drink milk given to you by a non-Jew. You're not allowed to drink milk you're not allowed to drink milk that was milked by a non-Jew unless the Jew is supervising the milking of that animal. Because if the Jew is supervising the milking of the animal, so now you know which animal it comes from. Right now you know which animal it comes from. It's interesting. Let me share with you a Gemara. There's an interesting Gemara, Maseches Avodah Zarah. The Gemara says as follows. Says the Gemara, when it comes to chalav, when it comes to milk, lemai nichushla. What are we worried about when it comes to milk? In other words, what are we concerned about? Im mishum ichlufe tahor, right? If we're worried that perhaps the non-Jew switched milk or is giving us milk from a tamei animal, says the Gemara, tahor chivar tamei yarok. Says the Gemara, you don't have to worry about that. Why not? Because milk that comes from a tahor animal is white, and milk that comes from a tamei animal is green. Wait a second. Milk that comes from a tahor animal is white, and milk that comes from a tamei animal is green. Have you ever seen green milk? Not even in a Dr. Seuss book is there green milk, right?
I haven't seen a tamei's milk.
Right? So what does it mean green? So the Mefarshim on the Gemara explain, when the Gemara uses the term green, it doesn't mean green like grass green. What does it mean? It's a kind of yellowish tint to it. That's what it means. So based on that, based on understanding from the Mefarshim, the milk of a Tohar animal is white, and the milk of a Tameh animal is tinged with a yellowish color to it. Okay, wait a second. Let's stop for a minute. Okay, let's just stop and let's reflect on this premise for a minute. Why is milk white? We all know that milk is white, right? Right? Why is milk white?
That's the color of chesed.
Right?
Red things in the blood inside of it.
The red things
color.
of the blood
Well,
inside
it's
of it.
coming from the body, okay? And what in the body is making this thing white? You're basically asking.
So Steve is actually giving an interesting answer, connected back to the production of milk. I don't know about that. I'm not sure about that. But from a chemical perspective, and we're gonna, Raz, you're gonna have to chime in here, Raz, because we're looking at from a chemical perspective of the milk. What are the components of milk?
Is water.
Water. The primary component of milk is water, fat,
Casein.
and a protein called casein. I think it's pronounced casein. I'm not sure. Casein or casein, I think it's pronounced casein. A protein called casein. Okay? Now, here's something interesting, and calcium also. Calcium, there's vitamins in there as well. So here's something interesting, right? I had no idea of this, right? Here's something interesting. In chemistry, there's something called a solution, and there's something called a colloid.
Colloid.
Thank you, right? A solution and a colloid. What's the difference between a solution and a colloid? The rabbis knew this thousands of years ago, right? I didn't know it until yesterday. The rabbis knew it thousands of years ago. What's the difference between a solution and a colloid? Raz?
Well, in the solution, you can't tell what's inside, but with the colloid, there are individual particles of the thing that make up the colloid.
Good. So in a solution, what happens? In a solution, as an example of a solution, if you dissolve salt in water, that is a solution, right? You can no longer distinguish between the salt and the water. They are mixed together. In a colloid, what happens? Things are mixed together, but one of the elements or one or more of the elements in a colloid retains its identity. So in milk, milk is a colloid, it's not a solution. And what happens in milk is that the protein, the caseins in milk, continue to exist independently. In other words, they don't dissolve in the structure. They continue to exist independently in the mixture. And when light hits the milk, what happens? These protein clusters cause the light to refract. What does that mean, cause the light to refract? What does it mean when light refracts? Bounces, right? Refraction actually means the angle, right? It turns at an angle. That's how we see through glasses or lenses. The light reflects and bends at an angle and is focused on a particular point in our retina, right? So that's why different glasses cause the light to refract differently. But the milk protein, the casein proteins and the fat in the milk cause the light to bounce, cause the light to refract away. The milk, it doesn't absorb the light. And if it doesn't absorb the light, what's the color? White. Something doesn't absorb light, the color is white. If something absorbs all of the light, what's the color?
Black.
Black. All right? So
the difference between color white because it's reflecting all the
reflects
other colors.
all the reflects all the light. Correct.
That's also it explains the essence of white, why they call it, because he's not receiver, he just pushes back.
Why what?
It pushes back,
Right.
even in colors.
Right.
In black is a desire to receive everything. That's why black is identified as a evil, as a
Interesting, right? So Iraj is explaining why the guy who wears the white hat is the good guy, and the guy who wears the black hat is not the good guy unless he lives in Brooklyn.
That's why Kohanim
Right, right. Unless he lives in Brooklyn, because white symbolizes the idea of giving to others. Right, white doesn't accept the light; it pushes it away. Whereas black, right, black accepts the light. Very interesting distinction. Okay, you had to.
Does that apply to women's milk also?
So we'll come to that in just a moment, right? Women's milk is generally not white. If you look at women's milk, it has a yellowish tinge to it, right? Right? It has a yellowish tinge to it. We'll talk about we'll have to talk about women's milk. It's in a separate category. So so don't have any between now and the next time that we meet. Okay? Right? So this is interesting. So the Gemara says kosher milk from a tahor animal is white, and milk from a tameh animal is not white. Right? Not white. Now, it's fascinating, right, this idea, because that would seem to mean that the structure of milk from a tahor animal is different than the chemical structure of milk from a tameh animal. And this is actually supported in the next line of the Gemara. Says the Gemara, V'im mishum eruve. And if we're worried that perhaps the non-Jew is giving us milk, it looks white, but maybe there's some milk from a tameh animal mixed in to the milk from the tahor animal. We're worried perhaps about the mixture. So the Gemara gives us an eitzah. What does the Gemara say? Nikum. What does nikum mean? What's the root of the word nikum? No, kam, kuf mem he, right? To make it stand. What does it mean to make it stand? What does it mean to make milk stand?
Stand?
Stand, S-T-A-N-D. What does it mean to make milk stand up? To make it a solid, to make it into a solid. What do we call that process? Where you make milk into a solid.
You churn it, right?
You churn it, you cause it to curdle. You cause it to curdle. What is curdling? Right? The process of curdling is making butter, making cheese. So you cause it to curdle. And listen to what the Gemara says. The Gemara says, Da'amar mar, cholav tahor omed, cholav tameh eino omed. What does mar say in the Gemara? Right? Milk that comes from a tahor animal will curdle. Milk that comes from a tameh animal will not curdle.
So all butter is kosher.
Oh, we're gonna have to look at this, right? Steve is like jumping ahead, right? And Steve is saying, based on that idea, then all cheese should be acceptable, right? All cheese should be acceptable, and we know that's not, or all butter should be acceptable, and we know that's not true because they add ingredients to the milk of tameh animals to get that milk to curdle, to become butter, to become cheese. Okay, so the answer to that is no. I'm just giving you, right? We'll talk more about the specifics of that, but let's first focus on this Gemara. According to Mar, milk that comes from a tahor animal can curdle without any additives, and milk that comes from a tameh animal cannot curdle without any additives. Is that a scientifically established fact or not? So there seems to be a machlokes in the scientific world as to whether or not this is true, right? I've seen in my preparation both sides that say it's not true and sides that say it is true, right? So both sides, and obviously, we need to try to figure out, even according to the opinions that say that it's not true, what did Mar mean here in the Gemara? But I'll share with you a fascinating study that was published in the journal Nature that investigated precisely this question, that investigated not the curdling the way that we measure curdling, but measuring curdling in a scientific manner, curdling being the clumping of protein material. This protein and fat clumps together. That's what curdling is. What causes milk to curdle? Just as an interesting aside, anybody know what causes milk to curdle? When the pH factor, right, of the milk changes, so then the colloid breaks down. And instead of the proteins floating freely in the liquid, the proteins clump together. That clumping together is what causes, that's what curdling is. Curdling is the clumping together of the proteins in the milk, the proteins and the fat in the milk. So this study investigated that, and according at least to this study, confirmed that milk from a tahor animal does indeed, without any additives, the proteins and the fats clump together when the pH is changed, and that doesn't happen in the milk from a tameh animal. And the study went one step further, trying to identify why that might be. Right? What's the reason why that might be? And the study concluded, based on genetic analysis, that there is a string of, I don't know, what do you call it? A string of DNA material in the tahor milk that doesn't exist in the tameh milk. And then the study went one step further and determined that people who are allergic to cow's milk are generally allergic to any milk that comes from a tahor animal, but do not show that same allergic reaction to milk that comes from a tameh animal. It's a fascinating study that seems to support precisely what the Gemara says. So based,
That study.
I'll get the study. I'll have to get the study for you, Rabbi Eckstein. Okay?
Scientist, the yeshiva guy.
It was the local milkman delivery guy. It was a scientific study.
Rabbi,
A scientific
it would be
study.
Amino acids, not DNA.
What?
It would be amino acids.
Amino acids.
Yes,
Okay,
yes,
a chain of amino acids.
Yeah, not
Okay.
DNA.
Okay.
Rabbi, this is-
There's a limit to my familiarity here, Jerry.
Just a general question which is under the subject. You mentioned Mar. Was Mar a specific name, or Mar was an unnamed gentleman of the Mishnah?
I'm not sure. Not sure.
It's amazing what you're saying. It just shows is the Jewish identity that they join together. They become one. And eventually also they become all one at the time of Mashiach. And that's amazing that in the essence what we even can eat, we have
Brings
that
one, has to
character.
bring one together. Interesting. Okay, so interesting point. So what are we saying now based on this? Based on this, it shouldn't be a problem. Asks the Gemara in Maseches Avodah Zarah, what am I worried about? The non-Jew gives me a bottle of milk, So I'll look at it and see what the color is. If it's white, I can assume that it's milk from a tahor animal. If it's tinged with yellow, which the Gemara refers to as yarok, then I'll assume that it's milk from a non-kosher, from a tamei animal. So then the Gemara says, but you can't rely on that. Why? Because maybe the guy took predominantly milk from a tahor animal and he mixed into it milk from a tamei animal, right? And therefore I can't consume it. If he mixed into it milk from a tamei animal, I can't consume it. So the Gemara says, not a problem. What should you do? Curdle it. Right? Curdle it. And if it curdles, so you know it's milk from a tahor animal. And if it doesn't curdle, it's milk from a tamei animal. So what am I worried about? So the Gemara in Maseches Avoda says follows. The Gemara says, that's very nice. Ida kaba'e ligvina hachinami. Very nice if you want to eat cheese, right? If you want to eat cheese, it's very nice. What do? Curdle the milk. And if it curdles, okay, it's good. You can eat it. Right? But what if you don't want to eat cheese? Right? What if you want to drink milk? So the curdle test doesn't work if you want to drink the milk. Right? So that's a problem. Right? Hacha b'mai askinan. What are we dealing with here in our Gemara where there's such a gezerah? The kabai le lechimcha. Because you want to use the milk as a liquid in a food substance called kimcha. And in kimcha, you needed the milk in its liquid state. So curdling the milk would not help you. Curdling the milk would not help you. So the Gemara has another teretz. So you know what? So don't curdle all of it. Right? Take a sample, curdle the sample. If the milk curdles, so then you know the milk is tahor. And use the rest of the milk in your kimcha. So says the Gemara, v'nishkol minei kale v'nikum. Take a little bit and curdle it. Says the Gemara, kevan de betahor name ika nisyuve de lo kaime leka lemekum ala demilsa. The Gemara introduces something interesting here. And what does the Gemara say? The Gemara says, even when you curdle milk from a tahor animal, there is still going to be some liquid left over. Still going to be some liquid left over. So now imagine this non-Jew has given me a bottle of milk. And I take a sample of that milk and I curdle it. Now, even if the milk was completely tahor, when I curdled it, what would I be left with? Solids and some liquid, because that's the process of curdling. The process of curdling results in some solid, but it also results in liquid left over. Now, if I take a sample of this milk and I curdle it and it curdles, but there's something left over, does that tell me that it's milk from a tahor animal? No, why not? Because maybe what's left over is the milk from the tamei animal, which didn't curdle. So it's not going to help me. In the case of a mixture, it's not going to help me.
So in a mixture, is it laws of Rove or the laws of multiplication?
Well, so in a mixture, if I know what the ratio of the mixture is, if I know that, then b'di'evet, I could rely on that. But I have no way of knowing that. I don't know how much milk from a tamei animal the guy mixed in there.
It has to be by accident.
Right?
It has to be by accident.
And well, we're talking about b'di'evet. In other words, I'm already presented with the bottle. It doesn't mean it has to be by accident. When we talk about a mixture, we talk about something being batal, something being nullified berov, or nullified in 1/60th. You know, I have the classic case, I have a drop of milk that spills into my cholent, right? So if the cholent is if the milk is 1/60th the volume of the cholent, it becomes nullified. There we talk about by accident, because nullification only works b'di'evet. If I pour a drop of milk into my cholent, so then it never becomes nullified. Okay, but here we're talking about that because that's b'di'evet when it comes to a Jew. right? B'di'evid here is the non-Jew gave you the mixture. B'di'evid means it was already done. You didn't do it deliberately, it was already done. The non-Jew had already done it. But we don't know the ratio. So since we don't know the ratio, it's not something that we can rely on.
So maybe for a different topic, or maybe yes, it's appropriate. Is there any reason given the Gemara why milk and meat are not allowed besides for saying it's halacha period?
No,
No.
no. The Torah, it's a chok,
Oh,
right? The laws of mixing milk and meat are a chok. I have seen scientific explanations to it, saying that meat is digested at a different rate than milk is digested, and if you consume them together, then it places a burden on your digestive system. But I have to tell you, there's a lot of people walking around eating cheeseburgers who look perfectly healthy to me, right? So, I don't know. Go ahead.
It's
Seth.
spiritual.
In this country, right, there was a decision saying that we can rely on the drink milk here without a hashgacha.
So Seth is referring to Rav Moshe's psak, right, which we're going to talk about. Rav Moshe's psak, which is that in the United States, where there is a governmentally mandated regulation that you're not allowed to mix anything else into cow's milk, that Rav Moshe says we can rely on that government oversight. We're going to need to analyze that tshuva a little bit more, and we're going to need to look at, in reality, is what Rav Moshe assumed happening, is that actually happening or not? We're going to talk about, we're ultimately going to get to talk about that. Okay? Raz.
Are you going to talk about rennet?
Rennet.
Are we going to talk about rennet? Well, we're going to talk about rennet when we talk about cheese.
Right.
When we talk about cheese, we're going to talk about rennet and the famous statement, or I should say the infamous statement, that Rav Soloveitchik ate American cheese even without a hashgacha. Is that true? Is that not true? Right? What's the, if it is true, what was it based on? If it's not true, what's it based on? So we're gonna look at all of those things. But there is such a statement made that Rav Soloveitchik ate that cheese. Whether it's accurate or not, we're gonna spend some time investigating. But we're still on milk, right? We're still on milk. So the Gemara has reached the conclusion that I have a problem, right? Because if the guy gives me milk, I have to worry that perhaps he has, maybe this is tameh milk. So look at the color, but maybe it's a mixture, and since it's a mixture, it looks white, but maybe mixed in is tameh milk into the tahor milk. So Gemara says, that I have a little bit of a problem, right? So what can I do? So the Gemara is going to tell me as follows. There's another Gemara. The Gemara says as follows, okay? So here so Tanina, this is a continuation of the Gemara Maseches Avodah Zarah. Tanina laha ditanu Rabbanan. So we learn from what the rabbis taught. Yoshev Yisrael bitzad edro shel oved kochavim. That what? So clearly, if a Jew is standing and watching the milking process, there's nothing to worry about. We don't need the animal to be milked by a Jew.
Maybe the vessel they use is tameh.
Okay, we don't need the Jew to actually milk the animal, right? A Jewish person needs to simply see that the milking process is being done to a tahor animal. Obviously, Iraj raises the interesting question, and that is, well, what if it's not sufficient just to watch the process? You have to make sure that the kli, the container, into which the animal is being milked is empty and it's clean, right? You don't have to worry that the kli is kosher because everything is cold. There's no transference of tam. You don't have to worry about that, but you have to make sure that it's clean, right, before, and that it's empty, that there's no milk from a tameh animal inside. So that's what the Jew has to supervise. And that's what happens in Chalav Yisrael. Trust me, there are no mashkichim who are sitting and milking cows. In fact, pretty much any milk that we drink is not milked by is not milked by a human being, right? Any milk that we drink is milk that was milked from the cow through a process of automation, right? It's not feasible. Yeah, you can go. I know that when we go upstate in the summer, there are farms you could go to and you can get, freshly milked milk. Is that the terminology? Freshly milked milk, I guess so. You can get freshly milked milk, right? They milked it from the cow in the morning and you can get it. You could buy it that day, right? You could do that. It's supposedly delicious. I don't know. I'm not a big milk person, but it's supposedly delicious, okay? But most of the milk that we get is milked through a process of automation, and it's that process of automation that is supervised by mashkichim to make sure that all of the steps in the automation process are in accordance with halacha. And when we talk about the process of automation, it's fascinating, right? There's a think about it for a second. How much milking is actually going on in a factory that is producing milk? Think about how much milk is produced, how much milking is going on, and how is it possible for a mashkiach to know that everything is being done properly? So the systems that are set up are fascinating systems, really fascinating insights into the technology of hashgacha, right? As to how all of this is done. But it's not. Remember, it's not like Bishul Yisrael, where a Jew has to actually do part of the cooking process. It's not like that, right? Chalav Yisrael a Jew does not need to take any part in the process of producing the milk other than supervision. Jerry.
So if it's automation, it's proper to drink it if it was done on Shabbos? That's a question. If you can't, I think you can't milk a cow on Shabbos by hand, is that correct?
So Jerry's raising a very interesting question, right? And which is a little bit far afield from our topic. Obviously, milk, right? Milk, which is factories that produce milk, operate 7 days a week, pretty much, most of the hours of the day to produce the milk, okay? And it's interesting because if you think about it for a second, when does a cow produce milk?
All day.
After it delivers.
Right? So we'd say a cow produces milk after it's delivered, right? It's a mother cow producing milk, right? After it's delivered young, right? But so how can we have milk all the time, right? Are these cows giving birth all the time? And the answer is obviously not. What is happening to these cows? Right? They are being given hormones to stimulate the production of milk. Right? We're not waiting for the birth of calves to start milking the mothers. Right? They're being given hormones to produce the milk. That's how we have so much milk. Raz.
Then, if you buy Chalav Yisrael, that means it's been supervised by mashgichim who make sure that everything is...
Who make sure that the milk is from a tahor animal.
But suppose you buy milk, I don't know, whatever the name is now. When I grew up, I was born, whatever.
Sheffield.
It was kosher, but it wasn't Chalav Yisrael. What's the difference?
Okay, so milk, which is not Chalav Yisrael, is milk that was produced not under the supervision of a Jew. It came from a cow, produced not under the supervision of a Jew. Well, how come we're not worried that the milk came from a tameh animal? Or it's how do I know that it's cow's milk and not camel's milk? Or that it's cow's milk and not camel's milk mixed in? And the answer to that is what Seth mentioned a few minutes ago, based on Rav Moshe Feinstein, Rav Moshe's psak here, which was we can rely on the governmental agencies that supervise to know that if they advertise this as cow's milk, then it is cow's milk. And there's that has nothing to do with hashgacha. Has nothing to do with hashgacha. According to Rav Moshe, you could drink milk without hashgacha. According to Rav Moshe, you could drink milk without hashgacha. Here's the caveat: as long as there are no additives in the milk. But today, when you buy milk, all of the milk has additives in it, right? And since the milk has additives in it, what does it need? It needs hashgacha. When you buy milk that has an OU or some other acceptable supervision on it, it's not telling you the milk is Chalav Yisrael. It's telling you that there are no non-kosher additives.
What do they put into the milk?
They put into the milk vitamins, minerals, things like that. Right? It's enhanced, right? The milk is enhanced, right? So the supervision is telling you that there are no non-kosher ingredients in that milk, and it's also telling you that it's produced on machinery on which there is no non-kosher products produced. But it's not telling you that it's Chalav Yisrael. It's not telling you that it's Chalav Yisrael. Okay, so how direct does the supervision need to be? Clearly, if I'm standing or sitting and watching the non-Jew milk, that's sufficient. There's no question about that. But what about if I'm not actually standing over the non-Jew while he is milking? Is there a level of supervision that is considered sufficient? And here the Gemara is going to introduce us to a very important concept in supervision, in hashgacha. And what does the Gemara say? The Gemara says, Yoshev Yisrael bisad edro shel oved kochavi. That the Jew is sitting near the flock of the non-Jew. The oved kochavim cholev lo, and the non-Jew is milking his flock, umevi lo, and is bringing the milk to the Jew to drink. Now, obviously, we're not talking about a flock where there are only tahor animals. Because if it's a flock where there are only tahor animals, there's no problem. We don't have to worry. We don't have to worry because we know all the animals in the flock. Charlie and George, we know all the animals, right? They're all tahor animals. We don't have to worry. We're talking about a non-Jew with a flock that has tameh animals in it. And the Jew is sitting by the side of the flock, and the non-Jew is milking Dorton over there. So says the Gemara, Eino choshesh. You don't have to worry. Why? Why do you not have to worry? Says the Gemara, because v'chi kai chazile, right? V'chi yosiv lo chazile. In other words, what's the idea? The idea is when the Jew is sitting down, imagine this scenario, the Jew is sitting on the ground and the non-Jew is over there and he's milking. The Jew can't see him directly milking, but what can the Jew do if he wants to? Stand up. When he stands up, he's able to look over the flock, and what can he see? He can see the animal that the non-Jew is milking. So because of the fact that the Jew could stand up, That's sufficient. Why is that sufficient? Why is that sufficient?
Or he's not gonna take a chance.
Because the guy is not going to take a chance that he'll to get away with milking the tummy animal, because he's worried that what might happen, the Jew might stand up dafka at that moment. And therefore the guy is not going to do it. What is that called? Says the Gemara, Kevan dechi kai chazile. Since when the non-Jew stands, he can see irsuse mirsas velo ma'arev bey. The guy will be afraid. Mirsas from the word yira. The guy will be afraid of being caught, and therefore he's not going to take the chance of mixing anything in. What do you mean the guy is afraid of being caught? What do you mean he's afraid of being caught? What's he going to get, a patch? I mean he's afraid of getting caught. He'll lose his job, right? Maybe he'll lose his job, or Jews, right? Or the Jew won't drink it and won't pay him for it, right? In other words, he's going to worry that what? He's going to worry that perhaps he's going to be caught, right? And since he's going to worry that perhaps he's going to be caught, that's sufficient. Mirsas is sufficient. And here we're introduced to this crucial element of hashgacha, which is known as mirsas. If the guy is afraid of getting caught, then that supervision is sufficient. We will learn about how this translates into practical kashrus, right? This concept of mirsas.
The government.
But not only by the government, but how does it work? How does it work with a caterer, right? How does mirsas work with a caterer? Does mirsas work only by a guy? Does mirsas work by a Jew as well? So Yirtzeh Hashem will take a little bit of a detour, unlike us. We'll take a little bit of a detour, and next time we meet, which I assume is next week, we'll talk a little bit about this mirsas and relate it to Rav Moshe's heter, and we'll also see why there are people who don't rely on Rav Moshe's heter. All right, everybody, a Zisin, a Freilich in Purim, right? A Zisin Pesach, a Freilich in Purim. Have a wonderful celebration. And Yirtzeh Hashem, we should all be together for Simchas.